the sheep and the goats. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was ill, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you ill or in prison and go to visit you?" The king will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me."
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. My name's Sophie. I am the Bishop's Officer for Homelessness in the Ely Diocese. I'm an Anglican priest, and I'm based out of a church right in the centre of Cambridge called St Benet's. I'm delighted to be here to speak to you this morning. I'm going to incorporate into my sermon part of my work, some of the experiences that I've had in my role, and I'll be glad to stay for coffee afterwards. If any of you would like to ask any questions, then be really glad to meet you and talk a little bit more with you. So as I say, I'm the Bishop's Officer for Homelessness. On a day-to-day basis, what that really means is that I'm chaplain to the homeless and street life community in Cambridge, as well as offering pastoral care to those who live and work on the streets. I also work with organisations across the city, both statutory organisations like the City Council and voluntary organisations like student groups and the Cambridge Church's Homeless Project, which some of you may have heard of. And I work in partnership with those organisations, both statutory and voluntary, to try and improve the services for those people experiencing homelessness and those who are vulnerably housed in our city and at risk of becoming homeless, possibly again. And I'm going to just start by talking to you about a Wednesday morning a couple of weeks ago when my alarm went off at 5:15 a.m, which was considerably earlier than usual, I'm glad to say. And I dragged myself out of bed in the dark. The autumnal chill that hit me as I got out of bed reminded me that winter is very definitely on its way. The reason for my very early start that day was that I was due on a shift with the street outreach team. The street outreach team are a team who go around the city in Cambridge each morning looking for and offering support to people experiencing homelessness. We chatted with people whose bed overnight had been a bench or a tent or cardboard in a shop doorway. It was a stark contrast from the comfortable, warm bed that I'd left in my own home a few hours earlier, very reluctantly. We wandered the streets for a couple of hours, offering hot drinks and breakfast bars to those that we came alongside, and offering help and support as well towards better circumstances. And all those who we met, whether well known to us as people who've been part of the street life community in Cambridge for a while, or whether they were newer to town, were all part of a growing homeless community in Cambridge. The verified number of people rough sleeping in Cambridge doubled between April and August this year. And as the cost of living crisis takes hold, it's likely that that number is going to continue to grow in the coming months. Not so long ago, the homeless community included a couple who were sleeping behind some bins at the back of one of the churches in Cambridge. They decided that the best place for them to sleep was amongst the rubbish from a block of flats. The rubbish being that which society had discarded. decided it no longer had use for, that in which no value could any longer be found. Rubbish, as we all know, is to be taken away, taken out of sight, buried even. I wonder if many of us here can imagine that being our best option to sleep for a safe place at night. Sometimes we hear people say that homeless people have a choice, that they choose to live the way that they do. I really question that. I wonder if many of us can imagine choosing to live amongst the rubbish of strangers if we had real choice. I personally cannot. I spent some weeks, months in fact, getting to know this couple, sitting with them, chatting, building relationship, building trust. And one day I asked them, "Come on then guys, what's your plan?" They said, "It's to survive." I'm sure we all agree that survival is a far cry from the offer of life that we hear in the Gospels. A life lived of all its fullness, a life of joy and peace, of hope and love. But survival is very often a necessary strategy for people sleeping on the streets. The life expectancy of somebody sleeping on the streets is 30 years less than those of us in accommodation. The estimated number of those dying on our streets has risen by 50% in the last decade. The chance of being a victim of violence is 17 times more likely if you're rough sleeping, and you're 9 times more likely to take your own life. So it seems that actually survival is a fairly good and necessary strategy. And it's often also all that someone can manage without help. Homelessness in lots of ways is a misnomer, a meaningless term, because yes, the group of people that I work with and that many of the services across the city work with are homeless. They are without a home, without a roof, without a front door. But often without so much more, not least of all company. People alongside, doing life with them. They experience not only material poverty, but they experience relational poverty. They're alone and isolated, also very often multiply disadvantaged, which is why they've become homeless, or perhaps what keeps them homeless. So how are they multiply disadvantaged? Well, they're often experiencing mental and physical ill health. They may be engaged with the criminal justice system, so perhaps on a license from prison. They may have experienced domestic abuse, which they fled from, or in fact are still suffering alongside being homeless. The homelessness is so often a symptom of a far deeper trauma that the person is coping with and living with. So what and who do we see when we see someone experiencing homelessness? Do we see a drug addict? Or do we see someone who has pain so unbearable that drugs are the only way they know how to cope with it? Do we see someone filthy? Or do we see someone so traumatized by their life experiences that their mental health can't stand up to society's requirement to be clean, to be acceptable? Do we see someone who can't be bothered to get a job? Or do we see someone so deeply traumatized by their life experiences that simply surviving day to day, getting through dawn until dusk, is a harder job, takes more grit, courage, and strength than many of us can possibly imagine in our jobs ever taking? When we see a homeless person behind the bins, in a doorway, outside a college, in the centre of Cambridge, wherever we see them, can we see beyond their circumstances to their humanity? Can we as a society shift from asking what's wrong with you to what's happened to you? Can we meet someone in their humanity, that same humanity that we all share, and the humanity that Jesus shares with us, with all its joy and promise, but also with all its brokenness and pain? And it's that same humanity that our attention is drawn to in today's gospel reading. Jesus says, "For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me, naked and you gave me clothing, sick and you took care of me, in prison and you visited me." And when asked, when did we do these things for you? Jesus replies, "Just as you did it for one of the least of the members of my family, you did it for me." Jesus knew what it was to need, to be vulnerable. He had been thirsty, he had been hungry, he'd been arrested, mocked, scorned, and hated. He had been judged and despised. He had been homeless. He had needed food and water. He had needed company in his darkest moments. He had needed people around him to speak up for truth and to fight for justice. He'd needed refuge. In his humanity, he experienced raw vulnerability. And so here in reading this, we hear Jesus align himself, not for the first time, with the least, the most vulnerable members of society, the most vulnerable members of his family. "When you did it for the least of these, you did it for me," he said. Those who live and work on our streets are often seen as the least, the last, and the lost. And it's the least, the last, and the lost who Jesus sought out throughout his ministry, that he dined with, that he spent time being with. And what is the gospel if it's not being with? What a challenge to each of us, to us as the body of Christ, as his church, to be with those who are often ignored, not heard or seen or loved, and very often judged. Not so long ago, I had the privilege of making a video with a couple of people in our church garden, in fact, in the centre of Cambridge, and those people had experience of homelessness. The video was to be shown to people who commission and lead services that work with people experiencing homelessness. And the objective was to show this video to them and to influence change at the highest level, to make service improvements by listening to the voice of the service user. I like to think of it as a bit of truth to power. These two people are amongst the bravest people I know, using their difficult experiences to improve the experience for others who will follow them. And they had 3 key messages in this video. We need a hand held, not a handout. We want to be seen as a person, not a problem. We need to be asked what we need and want, not told what we need and want. But this is not new stuff. Here we were in the summer of 2022, calling for the same care and compassion that Jesus was showing 2,000 years ago. Jesus modelled this for us. When he saw the man who could not walk at the pool of Bethsaida, he didn't see the problem the man had. He saw the person. And he asked him, "Do you want to get well?" Jesus always saw the person. Jesus' ministry was personal. And so often he asked a question of those he met. What is it that you want? Do you want to get well? Jesus was showing the same care and compassion 2,000 years ago that those who are marginalised in our society today are still screaming out for. When Jesus asked the man, "Do you want to get well?" what was the man's response? The man's response was, "I have no one to put me into the pool." His response reflected his relational poverty. He was alone. What he needed was someone alongside. He needed a handheld, not a handout. It's the power of 2. Alone we can do little, together we can do so much. We as human beings, 2,000 years ago and still today, need one another. Jesus journeyed with people, and so the call is on us as his disciples to do as he did, to see the person in front of us, to meet them in their humanity, to walk with them, to be alongside, to ask them what they need and want, to hear, listen, and respond with the character of God. Given our call to be alongside, I find it greatly encouraging that so many of the churches in Cambridge once again this winter are committing to serve those people experiencing homelessness through the Cambridge Churches Homeless Project, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, is one of the organisations that I work with, and some of you might be familiar with it. Like last year, the Cambridge Churches Homeless Project is partnering with other organisations across the city, again statutory organisations like the City Council and voluntary organisations like student groups, to open and run a winter night shelter from the 1st of November, so it just opened this week, until the 31st of March. And in this shelter, people will be offered the chance to be inside on the coldest nights of the year, with 24-hour safe accommodation when they would otherwise be sleeping outside. Some of the people I met on that Wednesday morning when I was out with the street outreach team will be able to come inside. In fact, some of them have already come inside this week and are able to have hot meals and hot showers, somewhere warm to lay their head because of this accommodation. But more than that, they're not on their own. They're inside, they're being offered support. There are volunteers that come alongside, and they're from churches across the city, and they play a key role in the smooth running of this accommodation, providing food, but also creating an environment of hospitality and welcome. And when they volunteer and they come and serve with the Cambridge Churches Homeless Project, what they find, as I find, is that this is not a one-way street. By drawing close to someone experiencing homelessness, we draw close to God. We encounter Jesus. We are blessed. It's not all us blessing them or them blessing us. It's not them and us, in fact, at all. It's a sharing in an experience of life together, connecting in our humanity with one another and with Jesus, and learning to see Jesus and one another more truly as the bearers of the image of God. A couple of weeks ago, one of the guys that I work with finished a 14-week rehab program. He went in June, which seems a long time ago, and he has just come out. And during those 14 weeks, he had extremely limited access to his phone, just 1 hour a week. So before he went in, he said to me, "You are going to write to me, aren't you?" I thought, it's a long time since I've written to anyone, but yeah, I'm going to write to you. Of course I will. And he said, and get others to write. And I don't care if I don't know them. I've never met them. Get them to write to me. So a group of about 8 of us from St. Bennett's have been writing to him. That's the church, as I said, that I'm based at in Cambridge. And to see him come to the end of his rehab program, to rejoice in his choosing of life, to see the light overcome the darkness in his life, and for the chains of addiction to be broken, for him to recover his humanity during that time, and to reach for the light and life and hope and joy, has been a privilege for us, and a shared joy with him and with one another. This is not all about us blessing them or them blessing us. It's not them and us. It's life together. It's being with, which is how Jesus comes to us as God with us, and how he still comes to us now. And the couple behind the bins, for so long they were hopeless. Not only were they without shelter, but they were without food, without water, without sanitary facilities and electricity. No electricity means no phone means no internet, and as we all know, no internet means you're cut off and disconnected from society so often. They had no sense of belonging, no community. The woman didn't even have a birth certificate. No birth certificate means no ID. No ID means no bank account. No bank account means no benefits. No benefits means no money. No money means begging or starving or stealing. What darker place can there be? Yet we know that Christ squeezes his light into the darkest of places, and with it comes transformed lives. With a little bit of love, some gentle encouragement, and a church that embraced them into their community, the one they were sleeping behind, the couple found their way from behind the bins into the church. They found their way to better circumstances and got a flat just nearby. When they wrote a letter of thanks to the church, a letter which I still carry round with me in my laptop case every day, they wrote this. They finished their letter with these words: "We won't ever forget the love and care that has been given towards us. We won't ever forget the love and care that has been given towards us." So yes, the ups and downs will come for them, for all of us. And for them, the ups and downs have come, and they've gone, and they've come again. Their journey's far from over. But they know that God and the church community are in those ups and downs with them. "What you do for the least of these, you do to me," he said. Amen.